Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Gorman, owner of Creative Computing, Princeton's only Apple specialist store, located at 423 Wall Street across from the Princeton Airport. Welcome to our show, Apple Talk by Creative Computing. Here we discuss everything Apple, from products to software, even technical issues. Today I'm going to start off with Apple's up-and-coming Worldwide Developers Conference. The conference starts on June 11th in Cupertino. I hope all of you are going. I'm not. Typically, Apple makes new hardware and software announcements at the Worldwide Developers Conference. There's lots and lots of rumors about what's going to be announced this time. New MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros, the iPhone 5, and iOS 6 and Mountain Lion, all expected this time. We've talked about a lot of them here on Apple Talk by Creative Computing. Some rumors corroborating new product launches are some staff at various Apple stores have been asked to work late. Apple has been bringing in products under lock and key and locking it up in secured spaces in the various retail stores. We, as an independent dealer, of course, haven't learned anything, and neither have Apple store staff, so we shall see what happens. But the rumors are very strong, and usually as the rumors get strong, you can tell at a certain point that they're likely to happen. So we shall see. Anyway, I'd like to talk a little bit about the things coming and what we think is happening and so on. Starting with the new MacBooks. Rumors are Apple has been ramping up supply. There have been new employees hired in the supply chain, labor supposedly hard to find. Companies that manufacture the current line of products are outsourcing staff and everything just to keep up with the demand, rumors say anyway. Apple, of course, is very secretive and holds all of the suppliers and everybody else involved to a high level of secrecy. So we shall see. The new MacBooks are supposed to have the Ivy Bridge processor, like we've talked about here on our show, Retina display, USB 3, and here's one I read today, which I don't think is very likely, but Blu-ray. The new Retina display screens are so capable of producing Blu-ray video and making it look so totally beautiful. But Apple has been shying away from the optical drives. They took it out of the MacBook Airs, and rumors are the new MacBooks aren't going to have optical drives either. We shall see. I personally don't think Blu-ray will happen, but it was an interesting rumor to read today. And of course, the new MacBooks are supposed to be thinner. Again, we shall see. The new MacBook Air rumors are also similar. USB 3, Ivy Bridge processor, Retina display. Obviously, no optical drive coming there. On the new iPhone, rumors continue to persist. One of the manufacturers supposedly released an image of the new glass for the front of the iPhone. It's the same width but taller, lending strength to the 4-inch screen that we've discussed here on our show. Another company, iLab Factory, that does iPhone repairs, probably not authorized by Apple, has released schematics of the iPhone 5. That's a very rare thing. Usually you see things like a case that gets leaked or a new headphone connector or whatever the case is. It's very rare to actually see a schematic. The schematic also shows the same taller screen. It shows the front camera being repositioned above the earpiece rather than next to it. I don't know what difference that really makes. And the headphone jack moved to the bottom like the iPod. I kind of like that. When you're holding the phone, if the wire comes out of the top and goes to your ear, it's kind of coming across your hand. If it comes out of the bottom, it's not in your own way. So I do like that. That could be annoying, though, putting it in docks and the like, although I don't know how often you dock your phone and have the headphones connected. You can see it at your desk, though. On the Mac Pro, the big towers, we don't sell a ton of them, but people do ask. An analyst from The Loop says that the Mac Pro will not be killed. Lots and lots of users petitioned Apple not to kill the Mac Pro. We shall see. It is the one model that hasn't had a refresh in a very long time. The Mac Pro, Apple's top-of-the-line high-speed computer, does not have a Thunderbolt port. I don't see how Apple can keep the Mac Pro without adding Thunderbolt. It's on everything else. But again, we shall see. Jailbreaking. Jailbreaking took a step forward this week. Last Friday, Green Poison, the untethered tailbrake software, was released. This version will jailbreak in an untethered fashion the iPhone 4S, of course the iPhone 4, and the new iPad. The only device that this leaves without an untethered jailbreak solution is the iPad 2 that was recently upgraded with the 32-nanometer chip. We discussed that here on the show. You really can't tell the model. It was a nice little improvement for the iPad 2. Improved its battery life. They're still making iPad 2s, so you can get them for $3.99. I don't know whether or not an untethered jailbreak will be released for that. Again, we shall see. The untethered jailbreak means that you can jailbreak your device, which will let you install a whole bunch of software that Apple doesn't approve of, other tweaks, things like that. A lot of nice enhancements. Of course, you void your warranty if Apple catches you, and but you get a lot of software with it, potentially. The tethered jailbreak would mean that to boot your jailbroken device, you would need to connect it to your Mac or your PC, I suppose. Who has one of those? You would need to connect it to your computer to reboot if rebooting was necessary. I find on the phone that could be a bit of a liability. You're out and about somewhere, something you installed from the jailbreak crashes, and now you can't boot your phone until you get home. That's Apple's issue with the jailbreak. The software that you might get that way is not approved by Apple, may or may not have bugs or cause a danger to your phone. Sure, absolutely true. Interestingly, though, the Green Poison version that does the new iPad and the iPhone 4S was released last Friday, 3 days ago, and it's been downloaded already 1.1 million times. It does show that there's a large demand for jailbreak. I would like to see Apple have the option to allow you to do it and agree that a whole bunch of things are no longer covered by warranty. I mean, if the screen falls off after you've jailbroken your phone, in my opinion, that ought to still be covered by warranty. But I could see certain software things or logic board damage perhaps not being covered. But I'd see room for some kind of compromise there to allow users to jailbreak. We shall see. One of the things that lets Android compete some with the iPhone, if you want to call it compete, is that you can really install anything you want on an Android phone. A little bit more on Android coming up, though, later in our show today. What else? MobileMe. Apple's MobileMe service that precedes iCloud is ending June 30th. You need to get your iDisk files off. If you were using Apple's iDisk, which I thought was a very nice service, you're going to lose your data if you don't get it off, make a local copy somewhere or something. I've already done mine. Speaking of that, iCloud. Some new things with iCloud. Apple's just announced iCloud allows up to 1 megabyte of storage for third-party developers to use iCloud syncing capability. I, for instance, use a program called 1Password, which is very nice. It generates passwords for me. It tracks them all in a database fashion. As you all know, we have all thousands of these passwords now. 1Password will type the password in for you in the various places you need it. It works great on your Mac and your phone. What it doesn't do is sync between your multiple Macs. iCloud could solve that. 1 meg of data would hold a ton of passwords. Hopefully that will happen. Other things that are supposedly coming with iCloud is photo sharing. You can take photos or sets of your photos, perhaps an album or an event from your library or whatever, and share them. Not the same as PhotoStream, which syncs them between your devices, but share them. So if I have one set of folders, say, that I need you to read, I can share them with you. I can make them publicly available, whatever. It allows for convenient photo sharing. Very nice feature. I'd like to see that. Video syncing. Also lets you keep your video synced among your devices. Could be kind of useful. And notes and reminders are becoming real iCloud apps. I like Apple doing more and more with reminders. I'd like to be able to do a little bit more with the location service still, so I could say in this spot, as opposed to only having to use, being restricted to using addresses in my address book. What else? Apple TV. Some interesting information on the Apple TV. The sales of the device don't bring in much income. It makes Apple about the same amount of money as the smart cover does for the iPad. But what it does do is it brings in about $10 a month worth of video rentals. It's an interesting model. It's the only one that works that way of Apple's devices. The Apple Television. Rumors continue to come out. A rumor from Foxconn in China says that they are in the early stages of production. Who knows? Foxconn has both confirmed and denied rumors of an Apple TV previously. A little bit later in our show today, I will talk about an interview with Tim Cook, and he speaks a touch about this topic. While we're on Foxconn, Foxconn has been giving raises. In fact, since 2010, they've raised everybody's salary 500%. If they want to work for Apple, they need to not be a political liability anywhere in the world. People can't say, Apple's a great product, but look how they abuse their labor. So Apple's probably putting pressure on Foxconn to raise the incomes of their employees. Also, another story that I read is that Foxconn is automating more and more of their production, allowing them to get away with fewer and fewer employees, but the ones they do have are being treated well. And I'm sure totally due to Apple. iOS 6. Supposedly, iOS 6 is going to have a lot of Facebook integration. A little bit more about that when I get to the Tim Cook interview. But the biggest thing seems to be a single sign-in functionality. Right now, if you go into a website or another app that wants, like Words with Friends, a very popular one, and it wants to link with Facebook, when you go to log into Facebook, the Facebook app appears, you log in, and then it logs out and switches you back to the app you were using. Not really that integrated. What rumors are is that you'll be able to sign into Facebook from any app that the developer wishes to provide this functionality for without having to leave the app and come back. I think that would be a pretty good integration. Facebook's very popular, although I don't personally use it a lot. Creative Computing does, though, and please friend us. Another interesting thing about iOS 6 is the kernel release. The OS X kernel underneath iOS 6 is actually one version higher than the one that's currently in Mountain Lion. That's pretty interesting. OS X is obviously currently under development and is always under development. Apple is about to release Mountain Lion, and I wouldn't be surprised if whatever one is next is already being worked on as well. But it's interesting that iOS 6 is even a later version than Mountain Lion. The beta code in iOS 6 shows an upgraded Samsung processor. Samsung and Apple have a whole bunch of lawsuits back and forth accusing each other of stealing patents and the like. But it's interesting that they both need each other and they continue to work together very well. And personally, I kind of like Samsung. The development of the iOS 6 beta release that I was just talking about is very far along. It would easily support a fall release, possibly earlier. The biggest thing to be seen in this demo is maps. Apple some time ago bought a 3D mapping company called C3. Never did anything with it, but rumors have been out there, very little, but I've mentioned them here on our show, about a 3D mapping technology. I saw a photo of one of the maps from C3's software. It's beautiful. It's like you're standing in the middle of the area. Looking at a map like that on your iPhone would be an amazing thing. The picture that I saw in preparation for the show shows that Apple is going to be incorporating their mapping technology in iOS 6, which makes sense. And the button that I saw would let you shift your map to 3D. I think it'd be pretty interesting to hold your phone with the compass and the GPS together and look at what's there, see the buildings, go into buildings and up. It could be pretty nice. Google, though, on the topic of mapping, Google is having a map event next week. Rumors are it will focus on new maps features. Nobody's sure. Google just says stay tuned. They're losing Apple if Apple goes with their own mapping technology, and Apple is one of Google's biggest partners. So I'm sure they're not super thrilled about that. Slowly but surely, Apple's competing with Google in more and more ways. Moving on, movie revenue. Interestingly, Netflix beat Apple in 2011. That's good. Most of the time, nobody beats Apple in anything. Netflix had 44% of the online movie market, Apple with 32.3%. In the movie rental market, though, if you break it into that subcategory, in the movie rental market, Apple has 63% of that for online movie rentals. That makes sense. The Apple TV makes that so easy. So does iTunes. And Apple so far has not gotten into subscription-based movies like Netflix. If they do, it'll be interesting to see how Netflix competes with that. Microsoft. Dun, dun, dun. Microsoft has been changing their license agreements to make class action lawsuits more difficult. They're offering to allow arbitration at a customer's location if there is an actual legitimate complaint. They're offering to pay costs if the complainant actually wins. But the basic point of all that is that they're making it more difficult in your license agreements to really start a class action lawsuit. Probably a good idea. And Microsoft does, just like everybody else, they try their best to solve problems. We're all very lawsuit hungry, especially in the technology area. While we're on the topic of Microsoft, Office for the iPad is due in November. It will include Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. I'd really like to see this. I'd like to have Word on my iPad. I'd like to have Word on my phone. Sometimes I go to meetings. It'd be great to have documents I've written in an electronic, perhaps editable fashion rather than on paper or whatever, having no real way to use them effectively without switching their format. And maybe Microsoft will use the 1 gig of sync data or 1 meg of sync data space on iCloud and allow some way to keep your documents together using that. Although I suspect they use their own SharePoint drive. And another leak with Office for the iPad says that Microsoft is ready to submit it for approval. If that's true, we could see it very soon, but it's due for November. Moving on, the European Telecommunication Standard Institute chose Apple's new Nano SIM card, their tiny SIM card for the phone, as the European standard. It's 40% smaller than the current SIM and backwards compatible with current SIM, so your devices can still work. I did see a Nano SIM card in a little tiny tray, so you can use it in a regular SIM device. Motorola and Nokia are worried about Apple owning a patent on a standard. I could see that, but Apple has promised royalty-free licensing. So hopefully Apple will do that, and Apple won't contribute to the intellectual property stifling that goes on. Another thing, there's a court case between Apple and Google along that line with the intellectual property stifling, where, I mean, not Apple and Google, Google and Oracle, where a judge has just said that do I have the notes on that? The judge has just said that the APIs cannot be copyrighted. When you write code to do something, like say you're printing a document, you're typing your program, the code to print your program is very well proprietary and can easily be copyrighted. But the idea of the API, which is the commands that you write, an API really represents an idea, not an implementation, and the judge has said in a strongly worded, hard to appeal way that ideas cannot be copyrighted. I'm very pro that, and that should free up some intellectual property and get us all some better software. Anyway, moving on there. Pay-as-you-go phone service. Everyone's heard of Boost and like Boost Mobile. Well, Boost Mobile will be carrying prepaid iPhones, as will Cricket Mobile. This implies a whole bunch of things. It implies a need for another area of market penetration. Usually prepaid phones are used by kids, people with maybe a little less money than people who subscribe. It shows that Apple's trying to get into every single market on the phones. I don't know which phones will be there, but I find it very interesting. And it also implies the beginnings of a price war, and it keeps with the idea that Apple is trying to compete with Android in every market it can. On the topic of carriers, AT&T versus Verizon. I read about a sample study using 40,000 different data points comparing AT&T and Verizon. AT&T is faster. Verizon is about 50% the speed of AT&T, according to this study. Verizon is more consistent. While you may only get 50% of the speed, you largely get the 50% of the speed everywhere. AT&T, it might be super fast 1 minute and not quite as quick the next. But for the most part, it's faster than Verizon all the time. Apple. According to Steve's biography, he wanted to reinvent 3 things: textbooks, television, and photography. Textbooks are well underway. More and more textbooks are available electronically on the iPad, anywhere else that you like. The iBooks 2 application on the iPad has a focus on textbook delivery. Publishers like McGraw-Hill have released a lot of their academic textbooks already for the iPad. I know at the schools here in Princeton, students can have their books electronically. I could see ultimately the iPad replacing the textbook. It is cheaper. Even if the students accidentally break an iPad or two, it's a lot cheaper than the textbooks are. It's more effective. Every kid can highlight in the textbook without affecting the kid who uses the book next year. It's good all along. Books can be kept up to date. On television, rumors are strong of more to come with the TV. The Apple television rumors we've been talking about on here, which I still don't know if it's a good idea, but the rumors are getting stronger. And we shall see what else comes out of Apple with that. Photography. Apple started digital photography really back in the 1990s with the quick-take cameras. They were big and bulky, maybe an inch, inch and a half thick, but it was the beginning of a total sea change in digital photography. Steve, though, killed the quick-take cameras on his return to Apple, and other companies got into it. Now, digital cameras are everywhere. It's hard to find a film-based camera. And even Kodak, like we talked about, is probably going under. They didn't jump on the bandwagon when they needed to. And they in particular should have. Apple, when they made the QuickTake, did it in partnership with Kodak. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Apple's also helped develop a lot of video/photography related technology, including MPEG-4, QuickTime VR. They use the iSight as an early webcam, which still has a high quality lens. People try to buy iSight cameras wherever they can because it's such a high quality camera. The iPhone 4 recently, not the 4S, but the 4, is Flickr's most popular camera. That's a pretty interesting thing. There's lots and lots of cameras out there. And then Apple has been hiring camera engineers. So who knows what's to come, but I think it'll be pretty neat. Tim Cook did an interview. I mentioned this earlier in today's show. The interview was with Walt Mossberg on all things digital. So he talked about a whole bunch of topics. Start with Steve. When Steve Jobs died, Tim said it was the saddest day of his life. I bet it was. He said he was impressed by the outpouring of letters, all the support and everything, everywhere. But it was the saddest day of his life. He said Steve was a genius and a visionary, irreplaceable. Tim said he will not try to emulate Steve. He's not Steve. He's not going to be Steve. He's going to be Tim. Jobs taught him to do a few things well and just forget the rest. Just do what you do and do it well. One of the quotes that he liked is, "The joy is in the journey." That's a quote of Steve. Steve enjoyed the process of nurturing ideas, getting them from start to finish, and making an idea happen. Steve told Tim, before he died, not to let Apple become a set of committees trying to figure out what Steve would do. Just lead Apple the right way, make things happen. Walt asked Tim some questions on the Apple televisions. Tim mostly tried to avoid them, but he did comment a little bit. He said that Steve called Apple TV a hobby. Tim hinted that Apple was not a hobby company and a lot more was coming in this area. Just like I mentioned a moment ago, so maybe we'll see. I still think it makes more sense to release a box with a cable card that controls the display. I think Apple can do whatever they want with that without having to actually release a television. He said that you generally agree that nobody's happy with the current state of TV. I know I'm not. There's like 1,000 channels. By the time you've scanned everything, half the shows are over. There's a zillion more options to watch online. There's no convenient guide. I remember as a kid just spinning the knob and you scanned everything. I kind of miss the ease of knowing what's on in a quick fashion. And Tim also did say that Apple was interested in TV. When Walt asked Tim about the 7-inch iPad, Tim just laughed and didn't answer the question. On the iPad, though, Tim had some comments. He said that the iPad is still in its early stages of development, meaning a lot more is going to come from the iPad. And that's a pretty big statement to say, given that they're on the 3rd iteration of the iPad. And Tim also echoed Steve, saying that the iPad will eventually outsell the computer. On the Mac front, he said Apple's not likely to ever be the one to make the most computers out there, but they will continue to make the best computer. That is so true, far and away. I think one of the best things about a computer should be, who cares how it works? If you just want to use a computer and get it done, and get your work done, that's a Macintosh. If you want to know stuff about computers and still get the same amount of stuff done, yeah, then maybe try something else, but I don't really see the point. On the topic of Siri, Tim said that there's lots more to come with Siri. That I'm interested to see. I think the voice interface, if they can really keep the processing up to date and really make it work and really make it work well, that has huge amounts of potential. Asked about whether Apple should have their own cell network or cable TV channel, Tim just said, no, we're not doing that. On Facebook, all the rumors of integration, Tim said, wait and see. So that's what we're going to do. Google, generally Tim would not comment on Google. He has asked about Google's glasses, and Tim said, are things cool or are they really useful? Do they change people's behavior? He didn't go any further with that comment. We'll see. I think the Google goggles could really do a lot. If the interface is good, if it augments what you see around you, if you don't have to spend a lot of time inputting what you want it to do. If you can just interact with your environment and give you data about what you're seeing, I think that would be useful. He did mention Android. He said they try to do too much with it. They do laptops, phones, tablets, all of these things. It makes it confusing. If you have one OS doing so many different things, it's not perfectly suited for any of them. When you go to the Android store, for instance, the apps that you can pick, you have to decide, and it can be challenging, which device they work on. It's just a big hassle. It makes it difficult just to have a simple app store. Ping, iTunes Ping service, Tim said he doesn't like it, and they're not putting much effort into it. He says Apple needs to be social, but does not need to have its own social network. I agree with that. Keep your expertise where your expertise is. When asked what was coming next, Tim wouldn't discuss it other than he said, great stuff, you'll love it. And that's it for today. Let me just give a quick recap. We talked about the Worldwide Developer Conference. We talked about new MacBooks and MacBook Airs, new iPhones, the MacBook Pro staying. We talked about the jailbreak. We talked about the Mobile Me transition to iCloud. We talked about rumors on the Apple TV, Apple Television, a little bit about Foxconn, a bit about the mapping. We talked about Netflix versus Apple, Microsoft, and Microsoft's upcoming software, the new SIM card, AT&T versus Verizon, Google versus Oracle, and the API. I'm pleased by that one. Apple's reinventing photography, perhaps, the interview with Tim Cook, and upcoming stuff. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching Apple Talk by Creative Computing. If you would like to suggest a topic or ask a question on our show, please email appletalk@creativecomputing.com. Please visit Creative Computing for all your Apple needs, sales, or service. We are located at 423 Wall Street across from the Princeton Airport on Route 206. You can call us at 609-683-3MAC. Visit us online at www.creativecomputing.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, join our circle on Google+. We look forward to seeing you. Mention our Apple Talk TV show to any sales staff and receive 10% off accessories.